noches. Good evening. Welcome to the YouTube channel of Instituto Cervantes, Manchester and Leeds. Tonight, we will have the opportunity to know a bit more about the Carnivals of Tenerife, and more specifically about the social role of the Carnival, the Murgas, thanks to Dr. Karl McLaughlin. And thank you very much, Karl, for accepting our invitation and being with us tonight. The Carnival is a time of celebration and rivalry that takes place in the weeks leading to Lent, and it is a major cultural event with thousands of people from around the world coming to the island to participate in the festivities. In that sense, I would like to underline that it's not only in Tenerife, but in many places around Spain. It's a very Spanish festivity, not only in Brazil or Rio de Janeiro, which are more notorious, but we have places like in Cadiz, where take place a very important carnival as well. But nowhere referring to the Canary Islands are the celebrations that more unmissable part of the calendar than in Santa Cruz de Tenerife, the capital of the Canary Islands of Tenerife, which boasts arguably the second best known carnival after Rio de Janeiro. And as I said, we will speak about the carnival, specifically about the Murgas, which play a very significant role in this carnival in Tenerife and are one of the main attractions of these festivities. The Murgas typically perform in a series of competitions that take place at various towns and cities around the island, culminating in the grand finale, the grand end of the competition that takes place in the capital in Santa Cruz de Tenerife. The Murgas, as will be shown in the talk, is performances where the participants show a critique about society in different aspects. There are humor, they are sarcastic, and they, as I said, there's a lot of social critique on that. It's part of the tradition. The Carnival of Tenerife will not be understood without the Murgas, and it's also a festivity that since the 19th century, when they are supposed to be started, well, they have been adapting to the reality of the contemporary subjects or problems or the critiques that they want to make. But let me introduce you our guest tonight, Dr. Karl McLaughlin. Is senior lecturer in Spanish at the Manchester Metropolitan University and is currently researching various aspects of Carnival on Tenerife, including the changing social and political themes of the songs of the Murgas groups. Dr. McLaughlin has a PhD in Spanish for the University of Bradford, with a thesis which was also presented in this platform, Instituto Cervantes, about the figure of Catalina Clara Ramírez de Guzmán, Extremadura's no conocida señora of the Golden Age. He has been active since 1987 in the service of training and conferences interpreter in the European Commission in Brussels, and he has his degree from the Queen's University in Belfast in French and Spanish. He also has taught or led postgraduate and undergraduate courses in interpreting and translation at the University of La Laguna in the Canary Islands, Bradford, Leeds, and been visiting lecture in many programs around Europe. Between 1999 26, he provides pedagogical assistance on behalf of the European Parliament's Directorate for Interpreting and courses of a wide range of the European universities. Thank you, Karl, again. I am sure you will enjoy this talk about the Carnival. In time of Carnival, we are not in this period. And after the talk of Karl, we will have some minutes for questions and answers from the public. So thank you. Muchas gracias. Tienes la palabra, Karl.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and thank you to the Instituto Cervantes for inviting me on what is a very special day. Today, as everybody will know, is Shrove Tuesday or Pancake Tuesday, but we all know it is Martes de Carnaval. It's a very big day in Spain, but particularly in Tenerife, a place that I have a long association with. So we thought that to celebrate the Martes de Carnaval, Carnival Tuesday literally, it would be a good idea to take you on, if you like, a virtual visit to one of, as Pedro said, the world's best carnivals. And I'll give you some figures and pictures later on to illustrate that popularity. So the idea tonight is to give you a flavor of what Carnival is in the capital of Tenerife, Santa Cruz. And I'd like to begin by looking at some general aspects of Carnival and then narrow the focus, as Pedro said, to one of its most characteristic and controversial elements, the Murga groups. Now, you may or may not have heard of these groups, but by the end of tonight's talk, hopefully you will know a little bit more. Murgas are a phenomenon that I have been studying of late, and particularly the content of the very witty and satirical songs, and also the role they play in their local communities and as platforms for social concerns. I'll try and make the talk as visual as possible, with many images and short video clips to give you a feel for what Carnival in Tenerife is. And I apologize in advance if the technical side doesn't work, because it's been a bit of a problem putting these videos together and to try and insert them into the talk. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay, and I'll begin my talk. Today's talk is it's entitled Costumes and Criticism. So that gives you a pointer as to which direction I'll be moving in. And I will be talking a little bit about the social role of the Carnival Murgas in Tenerife. Carnival in Tenerife is Carnival with a capital C. It's a very big event for people there. And because of that capital C, I've tried to structure the talk around things beginning with the letter C. So I'll be looking at Carnival. I'll be looking at the colorful Murgas, the community aspects, the costume, the competitions, the content, and of course, the controversies that content produces. You have a few pictures up here to give you a foretaste of what it's about, including the official poster for this year's Carnival in Tenerife, which is going on as we speak. Let me say a few words on the Carnival itself. Nobody is totally sure where Carnival first came from in the case of Tenerife, but it is believed that it began in the late 16th century when Spaniards and Portuguese coming from the Iberian Peninsula brought their own versions of the festivities. Moving forward a few centuries, many chronicles already speak about the popularity of these fiestas, with a slight differentiation between the upper classes, who would celebrate official balls and masquerades, and the lower classes, who would have more boisterous or noisy outdoor celebrations. Fast forwarding many centuries, and we come to the Franco period, where, because of the associations with debauchery and, shall we say, non-religious lifestyle, attempts were made to ban Carnival. It was banned officially, but clandestine parties carried on in private homes. And there was so much social pressure that the authorities eventually came up with a compromise. They allowed these festivities to carry on, but they couldn't call them Carnival. They were called the Fiestas de Invierno, the winter fiestas. In 1977, the name was reinstated to the delight of everybody. And since then, Tenerife's Carnival has gone from strength to strength, so much so that the government of Spain designated it officially, way back in 1980, a major fiesta of international tourist interest. And as Pedro said, it's widely considered to be one of the world's top carnivals. We in Tenerife think it's the second most important after Rio de Janeiro. And if you do go to Tenerife and Santa Cruz, please pay a visit to the Carnival Museum in the capital, which is pictured here in the bottom right. There are many typical associations with Carnival. One thinks, in the case of Tenerife, of the massive street parties, the very sumptuous Carnival Queen contest, which is broadcast live on television and on Spanish TV's international channel, and the very big and colourful parades which you have a picture of at the bottom. Those are the typical associations, and I'm not going to be looking at those as much as some other, perhaps lesser known features. Those features include some of our famous Santa Cruz Carnival characters, people who year after year turn up and delight the crowds with their appearance, their impressions of well-known characters. One of these famous ones is Fidel Castro, who has been there as long as I can remember, as has Harpo Marx, who goes around playing his little trumpet and horn and coming up behind people and surprising them. But the most famous character of Santa Cruz Carnival is, of course, Charlie Chaplin, Charlotte. This gentleman, Pedro Gomez, began taking the role of Charlie Chaplin back in the 1950s when he moved to Tenerife from the mainland. He turned out for Carnival every year for over 5 decades until his death. And on his death, the city named a square after him because of his deep-rooted association with Carnival. Carnival has also produced several milestones, and I did say I would give you some figures to show the magnitude of this massive event. It appeared in the Guinness Book of Records back in 1987, when 250,000 people turned out to attend Celia Cruz and her concert in the city centre. At the time, it was the largest gathering of people in an outdoor plaza for a concert. That figure was bettered just a few years ago by the Dominican singer Juan Luis Guerra, who drew an estimated 400,000 on the last Saturday of Carnival. Unfortunately, the record doesn't stand because somebody forgot to get a notary public to certify the figure. And, hot off the press, yesterday's newspaper shows the estimated number of people who attended Carnival during the weekend, 350,000. So that's an idea of just how popular and attractive Carnival is in the Tenerife capital. There are many important features of the Carnival also, not just the ones that I've mentioned, but two very, very big ones. The comparsas, top left, these are very colorful, very flamboyant dancing troupes, both male and female, in very elaborate costumes, and they dance along the streets to samba-style music, which one normally associates with the Rio Carnival. And it's that samba-type content that sets the Tenerife Carnival apart from many others in the rest of Spain. There is a separate comparsa competition, I should point out. And then we have the rondallas. The name comes from the term ronda, or a serenade, and these are large groups of singers, and excellent singers and musicians at that, who parade through the streets singing and accompanied by stringed instruments. And they too have their own competition at the main carnival venue. Another feature of the Santa Cruz Carnival is that ever since 1987, Carnival has adopted an official theme every year. And those themes have included, for example, horror films. So everybody dresses up in the most horrific costumes possible. The Glorious 20s was another one. And the theme for this year's Carnival is New York. However, in my book, feature of Tenerife's Carnival are not the comparsas, not the rondallas, or the famous characters, but the Murgas. And it's the Murgas that I'd like to speak to you about this evening. So what are Murgas? Basically, a very large band, as we will see, of people in very elaborate costumes who play not your normal instruments, but instruments they themselves make. They sing very witty songs, which have a common denominator, is that they tend to criticize situations, be they social or political. And in particular, they criticize politicians. They're not unique to Tenerife, as we will see. They're also a massive part of the carnivals in Uruguay and Argentina and other countries. And it's interesting to note, and this gives you a clue to what's coming later, that there is a set expression in Spanish, dar la murga, which means to be an absolute pain or a nuisance, to get on somebody's nerves. And that's exactly what these murga groups try and do. They try and rile politicians, essentially. The groups are mostly male, but there is a growing presence of female murgas, and they do go back many years. The first one in Tenerife, Las Atrevidas, was formed in 1987. And it's interesting to note that despite the move towards male and female combined activities, there are no mixed murgas. They are either male or they are female. In the case of the adults, there are mixed children's murgas, however. The contest has taken place every year since 1961. And although they are separate in terms of groups, they do compete in the same contest. Going back in time a little, I think it's important to acknowledge, to recognize that the murgas are not a Tenerife creation. In fact, the Santa Cruz, the Tenerife murgas, are a local variant, at least in their origins, of the chirigotas from the big and famous carnival in Cadiz. And they came to Tenerife in a rather unusual way, which I'd like to just describe for a moment. I have to take you back to 1917. Spain was officially neutral during the First World War, but would often send its naval vessels to patrol the waters around the Canaries. And that year, 1917, Spain sent the Laya, which was a big gunboat, if you like, it's pictured at the bottom, from Cadiz, coinciding with Carnival. And because many of the crew of the Laya were from Cadiz, they wanted to celebrate their style of Carnival. So they got permission from the ship's captain, the Ministry of Defense, and the Tenerife authorities to take to the streets and singing their chirigota style humorous songs. What happened after that is history. The Tenerife people loved it. They followed the processions, they joined in, and the following year, when the Laya came back, they had already set up their own bands. And the first one, which was called Flaco, survived until 1936. There's a picture of it at the bottom right here. To give you an idea of just how long-lived these groups, these murgas, are, here's a timeline of the current, or some of the most famous current ones, beginning with Ni Fu Ni Fa, with the doyens, the decanos of the Santa Cruz Murgas. They were formed in 1961. And the founder, Enrique González, became so famous for his work with Murgas that he received an official Order of Civil Merit from the King in 2000. And on his death, a statue of him was erected in a city centre park. You have the other ones, such as Triqui-Traquis, 7 years later, and several others from the 1970s onwards and the 1980s. In Tenerife, it is a popular tradition to be part of a murga, and you have several generations of the same family in the same murga in their local area. And that gives you some idea of the community ties between murgas and the local districts. Speaking of those ties, the role of murgas extends far beyond just entertaining people during a particular period in the year, during Carnival. As I said, they have strong ties to the local communities in their home districts. One of the Murgas that I know well, Los Bambones, from a place called La Laguna, is always invited to perform at the Christmas lights switch on, so well before Carnival. The Murgas get involved in social projects. The Diablos Locos constantly put on their Facebook page details of solidarity events, such as a march to protest at the lack of care of the disabled. Diablos Locos also organized collections during COVID for the big Tenerife food bank. A few years earlier, in 2017, all the Murgas came together to collect bottle caps to raise money to pay for an operation for Joel, a young local boy. And interestingly, every so often, the Murgas and politicians come together for a festive charity football challenge, which raises money to buy toys for needy children. The Murgas, as we will see later on, are often considered a collective voice on social issues, and many of their songs put out for public attention local issues, regional and national issues that I'll come to later. And depending on which district you go to in Santa Cruz, you will often see people wearing merchandising from the local Murgas. It's a branding exercise which gives people a sense of belonging to a particular community Murga. Are they popular? Well, I can tell you the Murga competition in the Santa Cruz Carnival is massive. Ordinarily, you would look at the photograph here and you would think it was a world famous rock star or band performing. It's not. It's the final of the Murgas competition. It takes place in the Recinto Ferial, the exhibition center, which has a capacity for 5,500. It's the biggest indoor venue on the island. Try getting a ticket for that final, and I wish you every success, because they sell like hot cakes. They sell out within minutes online. One of the problems is that the authorities and sponsors take up a lot of the seats. It's such a big event that it is it's very attractive for the island authorities to invite famous people along, or to essentially curry favor with local businesses. So they take up a lot of the tickets. The competition itself is broadcast on television in the Canary Islands and has been broadcast since 1995. And just by way of anecdote, one of the groups, Zeta entered Spain's Got Talent, the popular TV talent show, and won it. So that brought the Murgas even more fame and stardom across the country. So popular are the Murgas that in the past, newspapers in Tenerife used to distribute CDs, DVDs of the songs from the final with the newspapers the first weekend after the final took place. And here are some photographs. On the left, the 2008 CD of the Murgas final, and on the right, a DVD of the 2011 final. The Murgas are also very popular, well known because of what they wear. Their costumes are absolutely magnificent, and they have a separate section of the competition. It's not just the songs, the performances that are judged, but also the presentation or the appearance. The costumes are kept a well-guarded secret until they are formally unveiled at events that are held in the run-up to Carnival. And there are rules imposed by each Murga that nobody is allowed to put pictures on social media. You're not allowed to take photographs in the workshops where they are made. These costumes can take months to make. In particular, in terms of the local economy, they bring lots of work for shops that sell the fabrics, the accessories, They're a source of work for designers, modistas, seamstresses. When you think about it, you can have up to 85 members in a murga. Multiply that by maybe 24, 25 murgas just in the Santa Cruz area alone, and that's a lot of work. So much work, in fact, that some of it has to be done outside Tenerife. The best murga or costumes is mamelucos. They're the most successful murga in the costume competition. They've won it 9 times since 2013, so every year but one in the last decade. And since they were founded in 1981, they've walked off with the top prize 23 times. The costumes don't come cheap. They can cost about 500 euros to make. That was a figure for 2018. The Mamelucos have their own seamstress and a team of up to 15 people working on the accessories all the way from the summer, late summer, through to January. And some of them, as you can see from the picture here, are very, very elaborate. They are superb. Moving on to the competition. The competition is not just one event. As Pedro mentioned earlier, there's a final, but there are things before that final. Those things are the qualifying heats. The 8 highest scoring groups from the heats make it through to the final. And to ensure that the best ones go through, the murgas are seeded so that they don't all appear in the same heat. As I said, the songs and the appearance are judged separately, and the routines on stage can be very, very elaborate. They change costumes, they bring out props in very professional style, which in some cases would merit a performance in one of the big theaters in Spain. I'm going to give you one example, and this would be my first video, which I hope works. The context here is a song which criticized the gridlock traffic in Tenerife and how the authorities constantly urge the public to use local buses, which are called guaguas. They're green, all buses in Tenerife are green. So this murga decided to poke a little bit of fun, firstly at the gridlock traffic and the problems that people encounter day after day, pulling their hair out because they can't move an inch, and secondly, poking fun at the authorities for insisting that the guagua is the solution to all the problems. So let's see if we can play a clip showing this stage performance for the song about the guagua. Bear with me, please.
Mira ese vaya cara de mosquero, coño Juan que viene siempre del Realejo. Son 2 horas para llegar, pues trabaja en el Toscal, sufriendo las horas. Pero hay mucho más como el pobre Juan que hartos están ya. Solo quieren ver que de una vez esto arreglen ya. Hace años que se lleva criticando y las horas hoy seguimos aguantando. Es por eso que esta vez una solución daré. Con más guagua, con más líneas, más horarios de mi guagua. No me vengan con descuentos y campañas, porque aún de toda España sigue siendo la más cara. Ya la gente no la engaña. Hagan algo que si valga y pongan fin a esto ya. Nos ignoran porque nunca han sufrido estas horas. ¿O será que se levantan a otras horas? Ni siquiera se dan cuenta lo que esto nos afecta. Sacrificios y problemas cada día en carretera, y a la gente le da igual. Putas horas, ya no tengo solo un rato, los momentos con amigos que ni veo, de llevar pronto al colegio a mis hijos, a mi nieto, es perder casi mi empleo, porque yo no llego a tiempo, accidentes, ajetreo, pierdo a gente, pierdo pero, coño solamente quiero que por fin lo arreglen ya, lo arreglen ya.
So I hope that gives you an idea. That gives you an idea, a first glimpse or sound and vision of the singing, the routines, the lengths that they go to in order to get their very witty and satirical songs across using props and using a combination of audio visuals on stage, projecting. This is very effective on television and also very effective on the stage itself. The competition is governed by very, very strict rules, and I thought I would just mention a few of the main ones for you this evening. The rules are drawn up between the Murgas and the Carnival organizers, that's the City Council in Santa Cruz. The rules include the size of the Murga. The size has to be between 40 and 85. And there is a rule that you must have 40 plus murgueros on stage at all times, or the group is disqualified. Another rule concerns the length, the duration of the routine. There are various components, there are several songs, there's an introduction, there's a finale, but you must not exceed the 20-minute allocation for the final. If you go even a few seconds over that, you're disqualified automatically. The instruments, except the drums and other percussion instruments, must be homemade, made of cardboard, paper, plastic, or metal, or whatever. You can't have any pyrotechnics on stage, for obvious reasons, and no animals either. And this is because a few years ago, 1996, when Mexico was the theme, one of the groups brought a donkey on stage, and it got very distressed and there was a major incident. So after that, animals were banned. In terms of the songs themselves, the lyrics have to be original and must be funny and also critical. You can't just sing any song. There must be a critical component to it. Not only that, you have to submit the lyrics in sealed envelopes to the jury on the day of the heats. You submit the words for the heat songs and the song that you're going to sing in the final. The final one is not opened if you don't get through to it. During the latter years of the Franco period and the early 1980s, the songs had to be submitted for a rather different reason, for censorship, to make sure there was nothing too dodgy, and groups were forced to change the words of their songs if there were excessively dodgy things in them. You can't sing the same song in the final as you sang in the heat. If you do, you're disqualified and banned for 2 years. And under a very recent rule change, the content must not include anything that would be perceived as sexist, machista, xenophobic, homophobic, or transphobic, or racist. And this arose because a few years ago, Mamelucos sang what was considered a very funny song at the time, but did not go down well in the LGBT community. The song was called Somos Mayoría, We Are the Majority, and it was essentially poking fun at the number of people who declared themselves to be gay, lesbian, etc. LGBT communities were growing in Spain at the time with greater freedom, and Mamelucos decided to poke fun at it by saying that they've become so numerous that they are now the majority. The words of that song were deemed offensive, and several MPs raised it in Parliament, and Mamelucos were asked to formally withdraw the song and not sing it in the final. What do the groups sing about in the competition? Well, this is the current research project that I am on. I'm looking at the way the song content has evolved across the years and looking at specific moments in history. We can divide the content into a number of categories. You have national issues, and one particular year produced a common theme, which was the referendum on Spain joining NATO, with the Canaries, as some of the songs said, just become an American aircraft carrier in the Atlantic. Some of the songs talked about the impact of joining the European Union, particularly the introduction of VAT. National issues are less common than regional issues, particularly diatribes and criticism of the other island, that's Gran Canaria, particularly its capital, Las Palmas. One particular event in the 1990s caused a lot of content to be produced for the songs, and that's when Las Palmas decided to create its own university, rivaling the only university the Canaries had, La Laguna, and that was the source of a lot of discontent in Tenerife. So the Murgas reflected that discontent by singing about it. Moving to local issues, you have a massive range of topics, such as the closure of major employers, Philip Morris, the tobacco producer, very recently, a local dairy, Thelgan. Every year, somebody sings about the potholes in the road, poor public transport, poor levels of policing, and the last couple of years, the inability of Santa Cruz Council to remove monuments from the Franco period. Another frequent source of criticism is that Carnival may be losing its essence or its soul because of the demands of television, who prefer to stage manage things rather than have the natural fervor or feeling of the people. And looking through some of the songs that have been sung this year, I noticed one on e-scooters on pavements and the danger caused to the elderly, and another one on fat shaming. There is, however, one ever present, and that is political corruption. Murgas are the scourge of politicians. Politicians fear the words of Murgas songs in January and February. Both the politicians and the institutions that they belong to and work for are constant targets. And that gives rise to lots of scandal and also controversy. And I've listed just a couple of them. In the early 1980s, Jerónimo Saavedra, the president of the Canary Islands, was outed by the Murga called Ni Pico ni Corto. They made lots of references to his homosexuality when it wasn't widely known at the time. And he threatened to take them to court if they sang about him in the final. In 1994, Maribel Oñate allegedly influenced the jury in the competition to change the voting record to stop Guachipanduthi from reaching the final, because she had been tipped off that the final song was about her and her work as a counsellor. Another rumour, this time in 2008, was when the mayor of Santa Cruz ordered officials to buy up all the copies of the local paper because he wanted to prevent the CDs of the final songs reaching the public. Many of the songs talked about alleged corruption in a massive beachfront project. It's also known that some opposition councillors tip off the Murgas about potentially scandalous items that they can include in the songs and damage the rivals. It's not just politicians, but institutions also. And in 2019, Mamelucos were under fire from the prison officers' union in Spain because in their song about the state of Spanish prisons, overcrowding, people being on remand for long periods, they included some lines about prison officers, accusing them of corruption and laundering drug money, and also selling things in the prison to the prisoners. That led to a massive scandal. One of the problems that Murgas face today, and something they recognize, is that many of the exclusives that they would have had in past years are no longer available because of the prominence of social media. These rumors and these stories circulate on social media, and it means that Murgas have to be very, very creative in producing their surprises in their songs. Speaking of songs, I thought it would be of interest just for a moment to talk about the importance of the songwriters themselves, the lyricists. They play a key role and they are highly prized in the world of Carnival. So much so that news of a lyricist, a songwriter signing for a particular murga or moving from one murga to another makes the headlines. And the terminology used to describe these moves is very much the terminology of sport, in particular football. And I've put at the bottom here a quote which appeared on Cadena Ser, one of the radio stations, which said, "They're not Messi, they're not Cristiano Ronaldo or Pogba, but the summer signings, the summer transfer market has been just as agitated as the football transfer market." In some cases, the president of a murga will even offer a job, a full-time job, to a lyricist. So a job maybe in the company that the presidente has, in order to get them to sign for the murga to write their songs. So let's move on and look at a few of those songs and the content. I've picked Los Bambones as my selection for this one. They were in the final in 2020, and their songs focused on major social problems and on the state of the economy. The gridlock traffic, which seems to be an ever-present, but also things like the rise in poverty, the need for food banks and soup kitchens, high unemployment, and the fact that this is leading many people in the Canaries to find work elsewhere. And of course, there's the dig at the politicians, that their high living, their standard of living, the way they can manage to get money for themselves makes them immune to economic trouble. So let's have a listen to Los Bambones.
Solo quedo yo, curro 2 a 2, coño no me puedo quejar. Pagas extra 3 dietas y además una cesta en Navidad. Mira este cabrón que contento está, claro si es el concejal. El concejal.
at the end, as you will have heard, the reference to the politicians, and they're immune to that system, but the cause of it. This year, the competition was held just a couple of weeks ago, the heats and the final, and something very surprising occurred. The environment suddenly became the key issue, and this is perhaps the best illustration of where the Murgas play a prominent social role. 8 of the Murgas that competed used their time on stage to denounce the destruction of the environment, land speculation, the amount of projects for building more hotels and tourism complexes and resorts, ruining the environment, and money that they said in their songs went to foreign companies as opposed to locals. Many of the songs in the final were in support of the protests currently being waged by ecology groups. Protests such as the building of the Cuna del Alma, a new resort in South Tenerife, a giant hotel right on the edge of the La Tejita conservation zone in El Médano, and the planned port in Guía de Isora, a virtually unspoilt part of the island, which looks as if it's going to have a port built on it. The songs were fiercely critical of mayors and councillors for allowing those projects to proceed, granting planning permission and raking in lots of money in the process. And the key element in the final was the invitation to some of these protesters to appear on stage carrying placards. Now just imagine this massive platform for denunciation. It was live on television, it appeared in all the media, and it was very embarrassing for the authorities. And in the days which followed, many of these ecology groups posted their own thank you messages on social media. I'll show you one little clip from a female Murga, Tras con Tras, who used their song to talk about the arrests of the protesters, the work that was being done in various parts of the island to stop these projects, including climbing on diggers and excavators. You'll see for yourself here. Hopefully that gives you a flavor of the tone and the critical voice which the Murgas thought that they should assume on behalf of the protesters against this unbridled expansion for tourism purposes in Tenerife. Moving towards the end, I think it would be interesting to show just the entire range of things that happen on stage in these competitions. I'm going to end with Diablos Locos, who came second in this year's final just a couple of weeks ago. And everybody thought that they should have won because of the varied nature of the routine and the scathing criticism that their songs contained. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips of how they got the audience involved, got them on board. In the opening 5 minutes, all the groups try and get the audience to join them and to clap along with them and sing and cheer before they move into their actual songs. And then at the end, there was a surprise. I've given it away at the bottom of the screen here by saying what they did. The theme of their song was challenges. They were saying that they will accept any challenge. They will do whatever the audience tells them. It was stage managed, granted. But in return, they pleaded with politicians to accept challenges, to do good things for the city and for the island. And in some cases, the challenge to resign because they were so bad at their jobs. So let's have a little listen to Diablos Locos, who came second in the 2023 final. And just when you're watching the video, just look and see how the 5,000 strong audience gets really behind them in their performance.
Otro año aquí, son 50 y tantos y los diablos locos te vienen cantando. Otro año aquí, son 50 y tantos y los diablos locos te vienen cantando. Con buenos ensayos, alma y corazón, para darle al pueblo siempre lo mejor. Con buenos ensayos, alma y corazón, para darle al pueblo siempre lo mejor. Voy a empezar ya la actuación, ya descargar los nervios voy. Agitando las manos, moviendo la cabeza, estirando las piernas, moviendo la cadera. A la derecha, a la izquierda, a la derecha, a la izquierda, a la derecha, a la izquierda. Agitando las manos, moviendo la cabeza, estirando las piernas, moviendo la cadera. A la derecha, a la izquierda, a la derecha, a la izquierda, a la derecha, a la izquierda.
Sí, señor Santa Cruz, estoy medio afónico, pero lo voy a intentar. Por todos ustedes. Y dice: arriba la mano, arriba la mano, arriba la mano, abajo la mano, abajo la mano, desen un besito, desen un besito, una palmadita, una palmadita. ¿A seguimos?
Así.
¿A paramos?
Ah, no.
¿A seguimos?
Vamos, vale. Agacha, agáchate, agacha, agáchate, agacha, agáchate, agacha, agáchate, menea, meneate, menea, meneate, menea, meneate, menea, meneate, sacude, sacúdete, sacude, sacúdete, sacude, sacúdete, sacude, sacúdete, desnuda, desnúdate.
I think from that you get an idea of the atmosphere, just how big the event is. As I said earlier, tickets sell out like hotcakes within minutes, and they have a very, very good time. So you have 8 groups times 20 minutes on stage. It makes for one heck of a spectacle. But let's see how this one ended. Because, as I said, Diablos Locos challenged politicians to do things. They, in turn, said, if politicians will take up the challenge that we're putting out for them, we will take up a challenge that we have received. And this challenge is as follows. It's a far cry from the very elaborate costumes that took months and months to make. These ones didn't take any time to make.
Los hombres sin camisa, mujeres sin blusa, únete y pasaremos un ratito de bien. La ropa toda fuera que aquí hoy sería, celebra que el concurso termine en orgía. Pa, 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 pa.
There you have it, the whole repertoire, ranging from elaborate costumes, elaborate props, excellent transitions on stage to what must be the biggest full Monty that's ever happened on stage, the Diablos Locos. That brings me to the end of my presentation on Tenerife's Santa Cruz Carnival and the Murgas. I hope it gave you some flavor for the very exciting and thrilling events that take place in Carnival, going on as we speak, and there's still one big weekend to go. Today is Martes de Carnaval, and I wish you all a very happy Carnival. But before then, perhaps we could have some discussion as to what you have seen and heard, and maybe I could take some questions on the whole issue of Tenerife's Carnival and the Murgas. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. So as you have mentioned, we are open to questions. You can put them on in the chat, or you can also ask live on the microphone to Carl. I have a question for you. The participants in the Murgas, in the Carnival, it is open to anybody or just for the local people or people who have who live in Tenerife or have a relation to the island or to the place? I mean, would it be possible for people who just come there for holidays to participate in the Carnival, in the Murgas, or not?
No, unfortunately not, although surely it must be something that they could look into. One of the other rules is that the Murgas have to be registered on the official register of groups, and that includes the names and details of all the members. So all that has to be submitted well in advance. It's not just a pop in and perform approach. It's a very formal registration process, and you tend to have members just from the local area who belong to that Murga, but the songwriter and maybe the artistic director might come from somewhere else because they're fichados, they're brought in to do that. But essentially, it's a local community spirit. It would be a good idea, maybe, Pedro, for the Instituto Cervantes to set up its own Murga here in Manchester. Maybe you could have a Murga competing against Leeds.
Yes, that would be great, because I have the experience of the blocos in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and other places, especially in Rio de Janeiro, where you can join the bloco as a outside participant, but you go in the place where the carnival takes place, and you just come by or rent the same disfraz as the other parts of the bloco, and that is possible. But not in this case. It's only just for the locals.
Yeah, of course, other people and lots of thousands of tourists attend Santa Cruz Carnival every year. And I know that we have somebody from Las Palmas spying on this talk, by the way. They also go to the carnival in Las Palmas. It also attracts hundreds of thousands of people, but they would join the more spontaneous street celebrations rather than be part of these organized competitions. So I think there are two separate issues here. You can certainly get your costumes and join the spontaneous side, but for the formal competitions, you have to be members of the groups already.
Okay. We have a question from Jackie, says that how are they financially supported?
Wow, big question. Thank you. This is one of the controversial aspects of Murgas. So the Murgas have their own sponsors. And one of the other rules of the competition is they must indicate the names of the sponsors that they are going to put up on stage. So they have their little placards or big signs, which must conform to certain sizes. So they have their sponsors. They raise money by doing various things, by selling merchandise like hoodies, hats, instruments. And they also charge for admission for some of their events. For example, the formal presentation, the unveiling of their costume. In most cases, they would charge for that, although a lot of that goes to charity. And here comes the problem, or the ambivalence. They get funding from the Santa Cruz authorities in the form of grants. They often get the premises provided for them by the city. If you go to La Calle La Nordia in the center of Santa Cruz, it's full of little buildings which are used by the Murgas. So they get funding from the authorities as a social community group, and yet their job is to criticize the authorities. But I think there's a reason behind this grant system. Isn't it much cheaper for the city authorities to pay some funding for these groups to live and survive than provide activities for so many people throughout the year? So there's this duality of the opio del pueblo, if you want to call it that, the opium of the people, is funded by the authorities as a way of not having to fund many other activities.
Thank you. Any more questions? I have another last question. When you are part of one Murga, you can move to another, or is like a long life, feeling of belonging?
Yes, people do move. It's considered a bit of a betrayal, because probably you've had several generations in your family being in the same Murga, but you mightn't agree with the way the Murga is run. You might be part of the team that designs costumes, and your views are not taken into account, and maybe you would move Murgas for one of those reasons, or you may move to another part of the city. But you generally find that the members of a Murga are from the immediate area, and there's less transfer of rank and file members as there is of the songwriters and the artistic people, because they sometimes do move from one to the other. As I showed, the newspaper headlines report this when somebody big moves from one Murga to another, but they tend to be in the same Murga for many, many years.
Thank you. If not, thank you again, Karl, and I hope all of you come to Tenerife. It's a great island. I mean, it's we are not objective for the analysis, but it's like a small paradise. Each island, the Canary Islands, is called in Spanish the Islas Afortunadas, but it's very true. I mean, it's not the climate, it's the food, everything. So thank you very much for this very illustrating talk, and we hope that you will visit the Santa Cruz for the Murgas whenever you can. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody.